length in its latest configuration. A popular venue, World SBK is the 4th World Championship paddock to have camped here in 2021. Although the circuit only joined our calendar last season, it's been a regular testing venue and tends to deliver a fair balance between the different manufacturers as a result. Overtaking hotspots coming up from last season, and they don't come any bigger than Turn 1, the longest start-finish straight on the calendar. At 1,047 metres, these riders reach 320 kilometres per hour before a long, heavy braking zone. The next real opportunity is into the tricky Turn 5, downhill into what's now the slowest corner on the circuit. A couple of riders already caught out there this weekend. A reshaped Turn 10 compared to images we see from last season. The same revised route now used for both bikes and cars here, but even without such hard braking and with a longer sweep off the bend, the 265 kph back straight is still an ideal opportunity to make a pass. The only dry race of the weekend so far set the lap record this morning, 1 minute 41.493 from Toprak Razgatlioglu. You rejoin us live from Barcelona ahead of race 2 in the Hyundai N Catalunya round. Steve English alongside me. Jonathan Rea has led the championship for all but 3 races of this 2021 campaign. Although he trailed ahead of this weekend, the 2 races thus far have gone his way. 13 points gained in a wet race 1 after the retirement of Toprak Razgatlioglu yesterday. Another 3 after a race-long duel in a twice-started Superpole race this morning.
Yeah, it's really strange to say that as well, Alex, because the momentum seems like it's been with Toprak for most of the season. He's the coming rider, the rider on the ascendancy, the rider putting the pressure on Jonathan Rea. But it is still Rea leading the World Championship, and we saw this morning just how hard he's having to ride to hold on to that lead.
Yes, and plenty of that lead was just built up over the opening round of the season in Aragon. As you say, since then, Toprak Razgatlioglu has been the highest scorer.
Yeah, and you have to look at Toprak over the course of this season so far, and 2 retirements, both of them not his fault. The technical issue in yesterday's wet weather race 1 here in Barcelona, and then a clash with Garrett Gerloff and Aston that took him off. And other than that, Toprak hasn't put a foot wrong.
No, very consistent in terms of those podium positions, although that run of podium finishes was, of course, ended by that technical failure, as you say, here yesterday in race 1. Look at this morning's Superpole race results, and this gives us the grid for race 2 this afternoon. Jonathan Rea was victorious ahead of Toprak Razgatlioglu, hence the 3 points gained, as I said. Alvaro Bautista, with the first podium of this season, also gives himself a shot at battling for 3rd again this afternoon as he lines up on the front row of the grid. Row 2 will be Alex Lowes, Michael Ruben Rinaldi and Axel Bassani. First podium of his Superbike career with 2nd place in race 1. 3rd row of the grid, Leon Haslam, Garrett Gerloff and Christophe Ponson. Best ever result in the Superbike World Championship for him. He completes that 3rd row of the grid. We lost the 2 BMWs who collided with one another. Friendly fire from the BMWs. Tom Sykes, though, having finished top in the Superpole session here yesterday morning, will be best of the rest on the grid. He'll be starting from P10, and Michael van der Mark, who caused that collision between the 2 of them, will start directly behind Tom Sykes in P13. So BMWs both with work to do. A couple of surprises in that Superpole race this morning, Steve, with Alvaro Bautista coming up very nicely with a 3rd position finish.
Yeah, really impressive stuff from Bautista over that 5-lap race. Came from 16th to get himself into those leading positions before the red flag, and then made a really good start to the restarted race, and just rode really well to be able to pick off riders around him. Last lap move on Alex Lowes got him into that 3rd position, and he was able to stay there. Did really well in the longer race, though. You'd certainly expect him to be more competitive. His tyre consumption always one of his big strengths, and that's one of the big factors of who's going to be able to do something in this 20-lap race.
We're also looking at a very different race to any of the others we've seen this weekend, because we had wet conditions over the feature-length race in race 1. The shorter race, the 10-lap sprint, the Superpole race earlier on today, clearly is less than half the length of the standard race, but it was then also further curtailed by the fact that we had that red flag in the initial running. So we only got 3 laps and then another 5.
Yeah, and you can see here off the start line just how close it got between Toprak and Jonathan Rea. We knew right from the outset that this was setting the tone for the race and the battle that we were going to see, and that was the same up and down the field as well. And the 5-lap race meant that everyone had to be aggressive, everyone trying had to get to the front, and that's where for the likes of Alvaro Bautista, he did such a good job in the early stages to give himself that opportunity to be able to battle it out for those podium spots.
Yes, Bautista had put himself up onto the 2nd row of the grid, as you mentioned previously, Steve, by doing such a good job in the initial running. Couldn't keep up the pace with Ray or Razgatlioglu, but ended up being involved in that fight because he got through on Toprak after that big moment we just saw from the number 54. Held back Toprak long enough that it was just a little bit too far to come. He said if he'd had one more lap, he thinks he would have been able to take the victory in that Superpole race.
You have to say, though, look how relaxed Toprak is as well. He's really come into his own over the course of the last few years. His English has improved to massive degrees. He's got so much more confidence and comfortable in his own skin, especially in and around that team, and he's really been able to maximise everything around him, and he's turned himself into one of the absolute top riders in the world.
Good Superpole race for Honda, with Leon Haslam earning a place on the third row of the grid, and Alvaro Bautista up on P3 for race 2 this afternoon. Good duel between Bautista and Lowe's, and also Rinaldi in the mix, as you can see in this morning's Superpole race.
Yeah, it was a good battle for third position, and Bautista, that's the move that got him in front of Lowe's, and Kawasaki rider wasn't really able to answer back, but a good scrap between them. And this is going to be the celebrations down inside Bautista's side of the pit box in Honda. They've gotten a bit of rewards there for the hard work they've put in this year.
Yes, a lot of hard work and a very long wait for Alvaro Bautista since last season and his last podium. What about his chances over a feature-length race?
Well, over the 20 laps, we know that he's going to manage his tyre really well. He'll be able to use that X tyre, the super soft compound, and he'll get stronger and stronger as the race goes on because he doesn't tend to use up an awful lot of tyre. The issue for him is that there's going to be other riders that are just going to have more performance and more potential than him from the start of the race.
Yes, particularly those riders, honestly, on the second row of the grid, the likes of Alex Lowe's. One or two other riders that would normally be contenders up for the top 5 positions, but who found themselves out of position in terms of the grid. And the two riders I'd mentioned there, Scott Redding and Andrea Locatelli, starting from row 4. Yeah,
and certainly for Locatelli, it's going to be interesting to see what sort of progress he can make, because we know Scott Redding has struggled at times to make his way through the pack. Locatelli, on the other hand, with the Yamaha, be interesting to see if he's able to make some pretty quick progress in the early stages of the race. We saw in the initial starts for each race today that the Ducatis and the Yamahas were really fast off the line, so they should be able to make up some ground. See down there in pit lane that Chaz Davis declared unfit for race 2 after some bruising in the back after that crash in the Superpole race. So hopefully Chaz will be all right for next weekend in Jerez when we've got the second of this triple header.
Yes, get well soon message for Chaz Davies on that number 7 Go 11 Ducati. It really has been a tough season for him, and a crash and an injury at this stage of the campaign, certainly you feel sorry for him. Your heart goes out to Chaz Davies after seeing him stretch it away from the circuit earlier on here today. Meanwhile, along the bottom of the screen, Luca Myers' reaction to that was raised eyebrows at best. Luca Myers has been given a 6th-place penalty on the grid, which will take him right to the back in P21.
Yeah, and for Lucas, obviously it's been a pretty tough day, and we saw in the Superpole session they managed to get that bike repaired. He went back out there and had to come back in after only a couple of laps, so he's going to get the opportunity to at least get some miles under his belt today, but it is going to be from pretty much the back of the grid, so that's going to be a big challenge for Lucas.
Yes, he had originally qualified in 16th position, but with that penalty he does go to the very back, so Myers will start on the outside of the back row, 21st position out of 21 riders now, in the absence, of course, of Chaz Davies. Tom Sykes and Michael van der Mark, also riders who are somewhat out of position after a crash in the Superpole race between the two of them this morning, what I call their friendly fire.
Yeah, and you can see there for Van der Mark that just trying to get down the inside into turn 7, it's downhill through there, and he immediately goes over to apologise to his teammate Tom Sykes there for that instant, and Sykes able to accept that apology.
Yes, I don't think there was any intent there, that's for sure, Michael van der Mark. We were all doing the same at the time. I think the BMW team probably were also. They haven't had much luck, have they, BMW, in this 2021 campaign?
Yeah, I think of all the riders as well that we've seen in the last few years, van der Mark has had a tendency of battling with his teammates, but it's always been very clean. So that's a very rare mistake there for van der Mark in an instant like that.
Yes, you're not wrong. He's a hard charger, is the Flying Dutchman. But it's that MotoGP that Michael Ruben Rinaldi is watching there. Just noticed Quartararo flashing up on his screen. So Rinaldi making sure that he's getting in his viewing before we get underway with race 2 here this afternoon.
Obviously, Misano, a home track for Rinaldi. It went well for him earlier in the season, and might have gone well for some of the local riders today as well in the GP paddock, as the Superbike paddock feeds their way back onto the racetrack. We got 5 minutes before pit lane closes, so plenty of time for everyone to get themselves out there and then get themselves ready for this 20-lap race.
It's just a shame that the MotoGP viewing figures will have been affected by everyone watching the Supersport 300 cracker just a few minutes ago. But the riders are now making their way out of the pits. So we've got 20 laps ahead of us here this afternoon, and looking forward to seeing what should be another good race for the podium position. I do fancy that Ray and Razgatlioglu may be off in their own duel, certainly in the early stages.
Yeah, and you'd expect to see that the case once again. They have been pretty much in a world of their own at times through the course of this season, just with that little advantage that they have over everyone else. The field's really close in World SBK this year, but there's 2 riders that have just got that consistency and always seem to be able to give themselves that little bit of an edge, and that's Jonathan Ray and Toprak Razgatlioglu.
Yeah, Scott Redding is the perfect example of what you've just said. Went on a nice run of consecutive top 2 finishes from race 2 in Assen all the way to the to race 2 in Navarra. Before that run was then ended by a 12th place finish in race 1 in Manicor. That's not the kind of result that we have really seen in normal conditions from either Toprak Razgatlioglu or indeed from Jonathan Ray. We said it was a rarity when Ray finished in 4th position on pure pace in race number 1 this weekend.
Yeah, and that's been the difference between those 2 riders and the Ducati riders in general. You can look at Michael Ruben Rinaldi's managed to put away the MotoGP. It's already finished anyway, Michael, so you probably saw the result. But he's managed to put away his phone now and get himself to the grid, and he's been a good example of just those inconsistencies for Ducati. And Misano, he was so strong. We've seen him really strong in a few other races, but up and down form all the way through the season for Ducati, and you can't afford to be like that whenever you're trying to win a world championship.
No, yesterday was their day though. 1, 2, 3, their first since 2012 for Rinaldi. Bassani, who took a career first podium in 2nd place. Of course, the race winner Scott Redding, who said he refused to finish behind any other Ducati riders.
Yeah, it was interesting to chat to Scott yesterday after the race. He had said that in the middle of the race he thought this was going to be a really long one and it was going to be a frustrating one. Tell you what though, today in these conditions, very different. It's still going to feel like a long race. 20 laps around this track whenever you're having to manage the tyres all the way through. That's going to make for a real mental challenge for all these riders.
And we know that for the Ducatis in particular, but for all of the riders, following in traffic is one of the most difficult things for the tyre, for also the heat that it puts through the bike. And Scott Redding is going to be trying to come through the field, but he's going to want to get some clear air as well. So get some positions gained as quickly as possible, because we saw from race 1 in Manicor just how difficult it is to make a recovery once, of course, you end up back in the pack. So work to do for Scott Redding today. Yeah,
and plenty of work to do for Redding from 11th on the grid, and he needs to make sure he's able to get himself through as quickly as possible. It is going to be a challenge for him, but we've also seen that with that Ducati off the starting line, it does have a big advantage. It's a long drag from the grid all the way down to turn 1.
Look at the grid then, starting with our pole sitter, Jonathan Ray, the winner of the Super Pole race. Only 4th position from race 1 in the Catalunya round, as you can see. That is a rare race outside of the podium places for Jonathan Ray, who's your series leader by a 9-point margin.
Yeah, he's been really strong and consistent all the way through this season. We saw in Magny-Cours last time how hard he's having to ride to try and take that fight to Toprak Razgatlioglu. It's going to be more of the same today.
2nd place in the Super Pole race earlier on today. The first time that Toprak has managed a podium around this circuit here in Catalonia. Circumstances really declaring that, because he had a warm-up crash last season that hampered his performance. Well, stopped him from competing on the Sunday altogether, actually. Retirement from race 1 here yesterday. 2nd place earlier on. No reason he can't take the fight to Jonathan Ray.
Well, you can see there on the grid, Toprak trying to keep as cool as possible. There was a wet towel being put around his neck there as well, just to keep the temperature down for him, and you can see Alvaro Bautista doing the same. This is your indication of just how hot it is out there for these riders and how tough it's going to be. And
Alvaro Bautista, of course, has more hair to think about than the others, and that's always going to make your head warm.
I'll be honest, I think that's more impressive than his performance in this morning's Super Pole race.
I don't think many around these parts would agree with you. They were all delighted to see Alvaro Bautista get up into the podium positions. It was 3rd place for him. Compare that to a 9th position finish in race 1. Bearing in mind he came back from 6th 16th on the grid. This time he's got a chance to do it from P3.
And for Alvaro, we know that in the longer races, this has been the forte for him. We've seen all the way through this season that Leon Haslam's tended to out-qualify him, but in the course of the longer races, we have it where they close up on one another. This time is going to be a chance for Bautista to really take advantage of a leading grid position.
Another Tissot watch for Jonathan Rea. He has been the master of the Superpole race format in this 2021 campaign. Of course, he was the winner of the Superpole race as well earlier on this season in Aragon, Estoril, Assen, and of course Manicourt. And it's another race victory for him in the Superpole race here today. 5-1 over Toprak Razgatlioglu over the 10-lap distance. Jonathan Rea really the master of those Superpole races.
We've seen all the way through that Jonathan is so strong over those shorter duration races, and we saw that once again.
Second row of the grid is Alex Lowes, Michael Ruben Rinaldi and Axel Bassani. We're seeing Alex Lowes, who was 6th in race 1. He was 4th earlier on here today to earn his place second on second row of the grid for Alex Lowes. Rinaldi and Bassani alongside him. Then we've got Anthony Nelson on the grid. Let's hear from him now.
Thanks, Alex. I'm down here with Leon Camier alongside Bautista. This morning was absolutely fantastic, but Alvaro, when he spoke to him in Parc Fermé, he said he couldn't understand why suddenly he had so much grip. Could you probably explain a bit more?
Honestly, no. To be honest, it's something he felt from this morning. He felt that the tracking code of conditions was really grippy. The only thing we're maybe thinking, there was a car race here, I think a week or 2 weeks ago, and maybe a lot of the rubber from that was still on the circuit, and both riders commented the start of this weekend that the grip was really bad. Worse than when we had tested here like a month ago. And obviously this is a little bit strange. And then after this morning, both riders commented the grip today felt a lot better. Maybe the rain had washed this rubber off, but honestly we're not sure at the minute. But whatever it is, it's given Alvaro a feeling that he can push and he can make a better lap time. And for this, you see, he can compete with the other guys. So obviously this is something we need to analyse a lot more and really understand what has changed. But let's see for this hot race. Now the grip will be less again because of the hot conditions. So let's see what happens.
That's a lot.
No worries, thank you.
Leon Camier there, certainly as mystified as everyone else as to how Honda managed to leap forward into podium contention in race 1, in the Superpole race rather, earlier on here today. So Bautista will be starting up in 3rd position on the grid. His teammate Leon Haslam from 7th. This is Garrett Gerloff in P8. He retired from race 1 before race 1 actually started. Had a crash in the warm-up lap in wet conditions, and 8th position this morning in the Superpole race.
And for Gerloff, really important to be able to come away with some points from that race, and in this race to try and make some progress, get himself into those battles and get himself into the top 5.
Second row of the grid is Alex Lowes, Michael Ruben Rinaldi and Axel Bassani. Third row, Leon Haslam, Garrett Gerloff and Christophe Ponson. Great job done by him, as I said earlier on here today. Just caught a glimpse of Leon Haslam. 2 7th places for him so far this weekend, and 7th place on the grid, so perhaps he could make it a full set here. Here is Ponson, who lines up from P9, only 17th in race 1. Was a little indication there that he'd come through for what was his first ever top 10 finish, and the first time he's finished in the top 9, therefore, in a Superpole race as well.
Yeah, and really important to come away with that 9th position, give himself 9th on the grid and give yourself a chance of being able to score some more points today. It's going to be a real challenge, though, for Ponson with the likes of Sykes, Redding, Locatelli, Van der Mark and Cota Nozane all behind him.
Yes, but any featuring among those top 10 positions is an achievement for him after a run of over 50 races without managing to do so. So every reason to be all smiles on the grid there for the Frenchman, who lines up on P9. Strong next couple of rows of the grid as well. This is Tom Sykes, who lines up here P10. Didn't really get an opportunity to show what he was all about from first position on the grid earlier on today, after he was collected by teammate Michael van der Mark in images we saw previously in the build up to this race 2. So scoreless from the Superpole race. Thanks to his P1 in the Superpole session, he will